May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, my Lord and Redeemer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Please be seated. Well, today, one of the dangers of allowing a priest to be home to recuperate is he tends to write. So I don't have our former senior warden back there doing one of these things, so please don't do that. Patricia's got that job. But let me share with you today. Again, we're still in the green season, the learning season. One of the things I think we need to think about is the attack on the church in the United States. There's nothing, as far as we know, greatly physical about that attack, but it's certainly mental and verbal attack against the Christian church. And I want to share that with you because I want to talk about the subject of pluralism today. But let me take you back, because many years ago, several years ago, Patricia and I were in New York, and by happenstance, we visited. If you haven't been there, you need to go there. It's like going to Philadelphia and seeing where the first Congress met. Well, this in New York was the St. Paul's Chapel, which is next to the World Trade Center. As a side note, worthy to be included because of our subject this morning, the Hearts of Oak, a militia unit organized early in the American Revolutionary War and composed part of King's College, which became Columbia University a little later, would drill in the chapel's yard. That's how old this church is. Before classes nearby. Alexander Hamilton, who was about 19 at the time, was an officer of that particular unit. George Washington, along with members of the United States Congress. Now remember, the first 2 years of the Congress were in New York, not Philadelphia. The capital was in New York. Worshipped at St. Paul's Chapel on his inauguration day, April 30th, 1789. To me, that's hallowed ground. That's something that everyone needs to go and visit. It's just you walk in, and above his pew is this emblem of the seal of the United States at the time that George Washington was there. So you have to go there. There's an ambiance that's amazing. Now the priest of St. Paul's, the present priest at that time, this was about 30 years ago, the priest of St. Paul's wrote about a debate that he experienced between another minister and a Muslim scholar before a university audience, which happened to be Columbia. The debate went on as most of the debates do. There was perfect civility. Everybody was asked a question, then you would answer the question. The Islamic cleric expressed the fact that in his understanding of the universe, there is only one God. He doesn't have a son, which means we don't have salvation, but he doesn't have a son. And the idea of God having a son and coming to earth is nothing short of blasphemy to a Muslim. The minister, on the other hand, the Christian minister, who was Presbyterian, by the way, expressed his view that God the Father had a son who at one wonderful moment came to earth and walked amongst us. It's very clearly different, he said. The idea that Jesus came to earth as a man is central to his faith, but a blasphemy to Islam. Now, that kind of is interesting. We talk about pluralism. That's just the starting point. Having said this, having had that debate, he was mystified when the first question from the floor from one of the graduate students at the local university began like this, quote, "It seems obvious that both of you men are saying the same thing." Hello? Both you men really believe the same thing. Pluralism. And both the minister and the Muslim cleric, immediately both of them said, "No, not true. We don't believe the same thing. In fact, we believe diametrically opposed belief systems, faiths. Both of us can't be right. Jesus coming to earth can't be both blasphemy and this most wonderful event in history." But the student insisted. He went on, quote, "No, you don't understand." Don't you love young people? You old people just don't understand. You're both saying the same thing. Now, what's going on for the student at this point? Why would a graduate student, and obviously not a dummy, be saying something like that? I would suggest he's an unconscious victim of a religious belief, in my view, that's now dominant in the Western world. It's a belief normally not thought out, normally not supported by logic or arguments, but is passionately held anyway. It's called pluralism, the mantra of the political godless left in this country and around the world. Pluralism. You guys are all the same. Notice the arrogance? You guys are all the same. You poor, they should add the word poor. Descriptor, you poor guys are all the same. The word pluralism is innocuous in and of itself, right? We should be open to different views. That's called pluralism. But accepting the sort of pluralism that often leads people into accepting something quite different, which is called theoretical pluralism. We can argue in science, we can argue in history, we can argue in anything, but we need to be open. That's what hypotheses are for, to prove it false, not true. That's why science is built that way. Or philosophical pluralism or religious pluralism. That's the view the student held. It teaches things like this. All religions are equally valid. Remember, you guys, you're not very smart anyway because you believe in all these myths out there. There are many ways to God. I have my way, you have your way, everybody has their own way. They might refer to the fact that there are many roads up a mountain. I've heard that so many times. To climb the mountain, there are so many pathways up that mountain. But the view from the top is always the same. So you guys quit arguing. You're trying to get to the same place. Just be nice to each other because you're all going the same place and you believe the same thing anyway. That the differences among religions are only superficial. If you've ever read the Quran, you know that not to be true. That's pluralism. Many ways of believing, all leading to the same one God. They believe that at the ultimate reality, at the heart of everything, there is plurality there. There isn't just one ultimate reality. There are many. There are not just two genders. There are 57. Literally. So we all have our own way. I've always wondered why. I'm always thinking about, you have X chromosomes or you have X and Y chromosomes, so what do? Change every cell? I mean, I'm not sure how that works. There's only one set of sexes in this world. No one will be surprised. No one will be disappointed. So if you believe that God is love as the Bible teaches, or if you choose to believe that God is cruel and indifferent, or if there are many gods, or just one God, that's all true. For you, it's called pluralism. You poor folks just, stay with your own beliefs, stay in your own little houses, and we'll take care of everything else for you. The ethical command of pluralism is, now think of this. The ethical command of pluralism is very simple. It's tolerance. To be tolerant. One of the things I learned as a very young man in business meetings is the agenda on the table is not the real agenda. The agenda on the table is the one to get the meeting started. The real agenda is the one under the table that people come in with. Normally, when people want to express something dramatically, they may mean the reverse. So when you say, we want you to be tolerant, it basically means, I want you to be tolerant because I'm intolerant. My intolerance trumps your tolerance. But I'll use the word because it's a good word. That's the basic command in this religion of pluralism. You can choose to do whatever you want. Don't hurt anyone. But basically anything you want. And what you need to do is be tolerant of everything and anything. Morality doesn't matter. Just be tolerant. It's a call to humility to admit that we don't really know what this is all about in the world. To admit that we make truth statements, they're biased statements. Truth statements are racist and biased because everybody is different. Nobody has rules. You just live by your own lifestyle. We may not realize it, but they're just statements about what we like to believe. You like to believe about Christ. They like to believe about atheism. By the way, you may have seen that 2 days ago, the head chaplain at Harvard is an atheist. This is rather interesting for Harvard. Because atheism, I've always said this, is a religion. Always has been. Always will be. What we choose to believe, what we've been brought up to believe, intolerance is evil. So you don't want to be called intolerant, do you? Okay. And it belongs to those who claim to be the tolerant elite. Don't let them get away with it. The ones that call you intolerant are actually the ones who are. They're the intolerant elite. elite in whatever descriptor you may wish to use. The way to get the religious masses to be tolerant is not to encourage them to hold their views with politeness and love and kindness, but simply to claim that all views are the same. They're all the same. So therefore, what is forbidden and what will be punished are any claims to know the ultimate truth. You guys can't go around and say, well, when people come to you and say, well, what is this thing about you can only go to the Father through Jesus Christ? You biased, bigoted person. And you go, oh, well, no, that isn't what it means. Yes, it does. That's what it means. You do have a command. You do have a faith that is true. So therefore, you will be spoken of, and to, as you should be ashamed of yourselves. You poor rabble that believe all these mythologies out there. You're rather ignorant of what the world is really all about. Because if one thing that you need to understand is if they want to level all religions, that means a religion doesn't really exist. Only government or atheism or humanism, which is sort of a religion unto itself. As a young man, I started reading a lot of humanist books, and I thought they were kind of cool until I realized the pathway that they took me down, and I immediately got out of that business. You just happen to prefer your opinion over others. You're just this arrogant Christian group, and you believe your stuff over other people. Another word that's used is you're an imperialist. You hear that all the time from these young people. I don't know where they learn this garbage, but anyway, they learn that. You're a narrow-minded bigot. You're an exclusivist. That's not even a real word, but I've heard that many times as well. You think you've got a monopoly on the truth, and in the end that will be violent, and you'll treat people with disrespect. It is forbidden, and you must be punished if you hold those views. Notice what's going on in the world today. You must be punished. John 14, and particularly the famous verse 6, quote, I am the way, this will scare them to death. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I don't think that's ambiguous, do you? That's pretty clear. It's often quoted in response of Christians against pluralism. It is quoted like that because here Jesus leaves the disciples and us as modern day readers in absolutely no doubt of what he means. In John 14:6, he comes at this whole pluralist question from both sides, by the way. You have to read it carefully. Christ is so brilliant in whatever he says. Of course, he's God, so it has to be. It's brilliant. The negative and the positive in the same statement, if you thought about it. The positive affirmation of his unique position using the definite article, the truth and the life. Positive affirmation. And then the reverse. No one comes to the Father except through me. Here I am. I'm the only pathway. Positive command. Negative, if you want to call it that. You might be able to explain away those first statements by saying that Jesus is just using this verbal device to emphasize how important he is. He is the way to God, but not to the exclusion, come on guys, of all others, except the second half of the verse doesn't leave that option open to us. Jesus is claiming a role for himself and then making it clear that no one else can do that job. Period. End of discussion. That's what I like to hear priests when they try to, if you ever heard the ones that are trying to be modern day, and I always use that phrase and watch them squirm. And they have to, it's like the old definition. Well, it depends on what the definition of is. That old argument. Now we get into those idiotic kinds of arguments. You don't get drawn into that, by the way. Just keep saying it over and over again, the same words. They can't get through it. When you read the words of Jesus, particularly throughout the Gospel of John, you can quickly see that Jesus is not very pluralistic at all. He constantly makes what? Absolute statements. No question about it. I am the bread of life, he says. That's pretty clear. I am the light of the world. I am the resurrection and the life. I am God. I think that's pretty clear. That's what Jesus claims about himself. Never a bread or a light or a resurrection, like a whole bunch of them out there somewhere. Jesus claims that he and he alone came into our broken world to give us the light of life. You can't read Scripture, as Father said. It's the bedrock of who we are, without understanding the command and the direction. John 14 isn't part of some public debate. You can't debate it. There's nothing to debate there. No, this is right smack in the middle of the upper room. Now remember when this happened. It's right smack in the middle of the upper room narrative that begins in John 13 and leads to this discussion in John 14. It's the night before the Passover, the night before Gethsemane. The betrayal, the arrest, the trial, the crucifixion, it's all right then. The 12 are assembled with Jesus in the upper room where they are sharing their Last Supper when this happens. By chapter 14, Judas has already been dismissed to go and do his worst, and Jesus has announced to the remaining 11 that he is about to leave, and they can't follow him, if you remember those phrases. This all happened then. It didn't happen over months, all then. And they can't follow him. They can't follow him. They want to follow him, but they can't. And Jesus even warns Peter that he will disown him 3 times. And chapter 14 begins with these words, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." Isn't that a great one? I love that phrase. You know, if I ever get upset, that's the one that pops into my head first. Do not be troubled. What follows are designed to be words of great comfort to this small band of closest followers. They're also words of great acclamation. Thomas, though, what? He doesn't understand. Good old Thomas. It's always good to have a Thomas around, because then you have to explain it twice. And then the rest of the people around Thomas, who are embarrassed to ask the question the second time, let Thomas ask the question. You ever done that? Well, I'm so glad he asked that question. I didn't want to look so dumb. Thomas just happened to be the one that asked it the first time. Quote, he says, "We don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way?" If you might remember. Jesus goes on to explain to them in completely unambiguous terms that he is God, and that's why they can trust him. Quote, "Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father." I don't think that's ambiguous, do you? I don't think so. And finally, he promises them the Counselor, the Holy Spirit, that night. That's the way Jesus comforts his disciples. This chapter isn't simply some theological stuff, although I think it's that as well. Rather, it is the gentle, patient, loving words of the Lord talking to frightened men, which includes us today. Includes us. Jesus knows what's at the heart of pluralism. At the heart of pluralism is a heartbreaking admission. Think about the pluralist and have pity on them as they demand pluralism. At the heart, it's admission we don't know what is at the heart of reality. Pluralists are, if you will, they don't have an anchor. They're just floating out to sea with no anchor and no sail. They're just out there. They're screaming and yelling because they're so frightened. That's why the pluralists get so angry. We don't know, and therefore anyone's speculation is worthy of being listened to and treated with respect and whatever, because I'm out here and I'm scared to death, and so you all should be scared to death as well. Actually, at the heart of pluralism is either one of 2 things in my view. It's just my view. It's either hopelessness or atheism. That's what's behind pluralism. There's nothing there. Jesus says, you're not in the dark about all the great questions of life and experience. I'm here. I am the way to the Father. I'm the way to my Father's house, which is a loving, welcoming image of heaven. All the other great religious leaders who supposedly had great insights, in the end, they were all flattened by death. They had no concept of going anywhere, so they were flattened by death. Jesus Christ alone says, I can take death on and ultimately defeat it by going right into its guts. Now, these are my words. Right into its guts and coming back again, coming back out alive. Because you're going to be coming back out alive. You're my children. You will follow me in the same pathway. Only Jesus Christ has said those words. Or something like that. And you can investigate the evidence for the truth of this claim from Jesus by looking at the resurrection. He's brought back proof that he is life. And let me give you an example. You've all done this. And I'm not trying to denigrate the resurrection, but I just was thinking, as a child raised in Florida, I was always at the beach. That's why I feel kind of hemmed in the mountains of North Carolina. I feel like I'm in a closet. I need this horizon out there at the beach. I was always with my cousins, because they had a boat. I didn't. Would always want to go out as far as possible. Actually, not just as a child, but anyway, as far as possible. The most fun was when the waves were raging just before a storm. There were more kids out there in the water when the waves were crashing and the storm was about an hour away, because in the Gulf of Mexico there are no waves. So in the Gulf of Mexico you had to get a storm to get any waves at all. Remember, we were young and we were invincible. You may not remember that, but if you look at your grandkids, they're invincible. Nowadays they wear capes and they run around being invincible. My mother and I remember seeing them. My mother and my aunt would often be waving from the beach something about sharks or something like that, which we didn't care about. So you dive down into these, you go way out past the sandbars, and you dive down into the crashing waves, and your eardrums, if you might remember, if you did it in lakes or other places, that hurt. Because you're trying to get as far down, because you challenged each other. I'm going to go to the bottom. Well, so am I. 9-year-olds do that. They try to do that. Your eardrums would almost burst, and you see if you could touch the bottom. And the way to prove in Florida, in the Gulf of Mexico, that you would touch the bottom was that you would come up with a sand dollar in your hand. Anybody know what a sand dollar is? You had to bring up a sand dollar, which meant that you not just touch the bottom, you had to dig in the bottom to find a sand dollar. Meanwhile, you're probably dying. I remember running out of air and everything. You'd show off in this brief moment of triumph. I haven't been able to hear well since then, but it was all worth it. The sand dollar was the proof. There is a sense in which by the resurrection Jesus is saying that he has proven his claim. I am the life, he says, and I'll prove it to you by rising from the dead. You see, humans have been programmed to prove the truth of a statement, the truth of what is happening. Christ said, here is the truth about my resurrection. As with most claims, you must make some sort of choice about it, though. Are you going to ignore it politely, or are you going to embrace the light and the life? You may continue to believe the dogma of pluralism. It very rarely, think about it, it very rarely tries to prove itself. It just asserts. It is true. Do you ever try to argue with someone on that point? They go nuts because there's nothing to argue about. So they will attack rather than argue. There's a difference. No one knows, it says, after all, no one's died and come back. Oh, really? Or pluralism tries to belittle Jesus as if he's just my little private spiritual guru, instead of being at this magnificent moment when God invades our dark world. The pluralist doctrine is that all religions are the same, and we've all got our hands on a little bit of the elephant. Remember the story of the elephant? Blind man and the elephant? It's a nice appeal to our emotions. Now we can believe nice lies for a long time. People do believe lies for a long time until something happens, so we can do that. But in the end, reality is hard on lies. And because that's one of the things that I was told as a child, maybe you told your children or grandchildren, the worst thing to do is to tell a lie. Because what? You have to remember the lie that you told. And then you have to tell another lie when you're asked the question. Now you have to remember 2 lies. So it's better to tell the truth. Because you know what that is. That's reality. But you forget the lies that you've been telling. Reality is hard on lies. And because Jesus' compassion and kindness and love, he corrects lies. You can take this magnificent Savior, come down to us from heaven, or you can take the pluralist Jesus who might have some wisdom, but in the end, he just died and went away. If you stay with Jesus and you refuse to be silenced, then you will suffer. Understand that. You will suffer. You will be shamed. You will be misrepresented. The pluralist, true God, intolerance incarnate, government will come after you. It just will. Just expect it. There's something incredibly ironic about these 2 pluralist illustrations I used earlier. The roads up the mountain and the elephant. Those are both the ones you've heard. They're often used to say to Christians, show some humility. Come on, guys. Be humble, if you will. You've only got one little part of the picture. You're blind. You have just one little hand on one part of the elephant. You really don't know what the rest of the elephant's all about. But here's the irony. To be able to know that all these roads lead to the top of the mountain, where do you need to be standing to know that? At the top of the mountain, looking down. The person using the elephant story to tell you to be humble is claiming to be the one who can see the whole elephant from the top. You poor little peons. You misguided people. I can see from the top of the mountain. And you guys don't know what you're talking about. Everyone else is blindly grabbing hold of one part of one of the parts or another, but the pluralists can see everything. After all, they're better than you. You just believe in these myths. There's something wrong with you. The billions of religious people are all blind, but the pluralist is the only one who can see. All roads lead to the same God at the top of the mountain. And who is that God? Who is that God for them? It's the pluralist who must be perched up there looking down. And they dare to accuse Christians of arrogance for following the truth. They dare to accuse us of being arrogant when they are the arrogant group. Beware of pluralism. Its intentions seem to be good. It's pursuing peace, after all. And, dancing around the maypole, and we're all going to be friendly, etc. But it's seemingly harmless acid which will melt down the uniqueness of Jesus, the divinity of Jesus and His great work for us on the cross. It will make that optional. Well, you can believe in Him, but then I can believe in nirvana, or I can believe in something else. It will destroy both Christians and Easter. One of my favorite writers, G.K. Chesterton, an English author from many years ago, said this: "An open mind is like an open mouth." I thought it was rather interesting. Its purpose is to bite on something nourishing. Otherwise, it becomes like a sewer, accepting everything and rejecting nothing. That's pluralism. Pluralism makes our minds full of trash, theological and philosophical sewers, poisoned and wasting away. We need to decide as Christians that we'll not bow down to that temple. It is a temple of pluralism. As Anglicans, finally, we need to stand bravely with Jesus and proclaim over, and I don't care where you are, and the reason I'm putting it this way is I had a young man who was tired of being called a bigot, etc., all the time, and he said, "I tell you what, Mr. Sokol, Dr. Sokol," he said, this is what I'm going to say from now. When somebody comes up and calls me a bigot, I'm going to say, "You offend me and you're a racist." And they have no way to come back. He said, so every time somebody comes at me for my conservative views, I just say, "You offend me and you're racist." "Well, no, I'm not." "Yes, you are." Well, you ever see they start spinning like a top at that point? So my comment to you is, using his same philosophy, consistently say, Jesus said this. Jesus said this. Jesus said this. Just keep drilling it. The same three words. Not me, not my opinion. It's God's truth. For I am the way, the truth, and the life. That's what Jesus says. And no one comes to the Father except through me. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.